Hey everyone, quick note before we kick off today's webinar. This introduction you are about to hear is being stitched on after the fact because during the live session, I somehow managed to do the first few minutes of the webinar without actually sharing my screen. Classic move. So, this is the director's cut version of the introduction, now with actual slides. And with that out of the way, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you here. Today's session is all about learning how professional services agencies can streamline how they deliver work to clients and how they get paid. It will include a live walkthrough of Gap Consulting's own internal setup built in Noloco. And yeah, I suppose we had an incredible turnout for this session with lots of engagement and lots of great questions. So yeah, really hope you enjoy the playback and welcome. So before we get into the agenda, we'll just do a quick intro into your two hosts for today's call. So first and foremost, I'm Jill, Head of Partnerships here at Noloco. I work closely with our network of certified experts, agencies, and consultants who do amazing work to help our customers really adopt and gain value from Noloco. And I'm joined by Matthew Oates, practice leader at Gap Consulting. Gap is one of our longer standing agency partners, but more importantly, they use Noloco internally to run their operations, which is great. And Matt will introduce himself and the Gap team in just a moment. But first, here's what we'll cover in today's session. So the plan is, we'll kick off with some context from Matt about how Gap operates, the challenges that they were facing, and the solution that they designed to overcome those challenges. It will include a live demo of Noloco, as I mentioned, and yeah, you'll get a real peek behind the curtain of exactly how they are using the solution to run the business, which is great. And then after that, we'll talk about the results that they have seen. We'll share some takeaways that you can all walk away from in today's session, and also, of course, best next steps depending on where you're at in your Noloco journey. And after that, we wrap up with some really great Q&A for about 20 minutes or so. So if you're watching the replay, you'll still get the great benefit of catching up on those questions too. So now that we've set the stage properly and actually remembered to share the slides, we'll get back into the live session where Matt takes it from here.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Gap Consulting is also an agency. We were founded in 2018. We're primarily based out of North America. We've got a team of 20 folks, and we've worked on hundreds of projects since then, everything from Joe's Plumbing to Disney Plus. So we've done, I would say the average client we work with is usually a mid-size, small to mid-sized business is mostly what we do. And so we've seen a tremendous amount of use cases. What we're hoping to do today is to share with you our experience as an agency. Now, because we're a software development, a custom software development company, our deliverables and what I shared today may not be exactly a match for the type of services or deliverables that you guys produce in your companies. But I'm hoping that it's a broad enough use case that you will find some insights that are valuable for you today. So our focus is primarily helping businesses to scale profitably using low-code tools and technologies, and we usually use a suite of tools in our implementations. But really, it's driven first by the workflow. First thing we always do with clients is sit down and say the secret to building, and this is based on our experience over many years and many successes and failures, is the secret to building a productive and successful systems is not to focus on the system to start with. First thing you need to focus on is what is the process? What is your current workflow? What is your new workflow? And then you need to use the technology as a tool to accomplish that. If you don't, you can kind of go into la la land where you're just thinking about, oh, here's all the wonderful things that we could do, and let's see if we can incorporate this new shiny thing. And it ends up being interesting and academic, but not necessarily practical. And so that's usually our guidance and our methodology is to always focus on the workflow design first, then on implementation using the tools that will support that workflow. And to that end, we applied our same methodologies to ourselves in the use case that we're going to go over today. to solve all our own operational challenges. Right. So challenge that we faced was we basically had bottlenecks kind of in a couple key areas, but really what it came down to was the end result was unacceptable levels of cash flow. In other words, the receivables that we created far outpaced and were way in arrears of the services we were delivering, which for any business that can spell disaster eventually. So we sort of saw that happening. And the main causes of it were that we had a sequential process of delivery, and not everybody has this. Other people solve this through different billing mechanisms. So this may or may not be applicable to your business, but I'm going to share with the challenges that we had. So we typically had a process where typically what we do is we would create the deliverables, test them, deliver them to the client through one or more meetings, synchronous meetings. The client would then have to digest all of those deliverables. We would then bill for that, eventually get paid once those were approved, and then go into a planning session for the next series of deliverables. Then what we would see is a very long delay, which would have an impact not only on cash flow, but also on utilization of our folks, where we're just waiting for the last batch of deliverables to get approved before we could move into the next batch of deliverables, or get revisions on the first batch and then do them over again with a new version. So that was creating significant delays in utilization of folks, in timing, in delivery, and certainly in cash flow. It wasn't an ideal environment. So we sat down and said, how can we apply some of our own methodologies that we use for clients to ourselves to try and solve this problem? Next slide.
Perfect. Yeah.
So this is a little bit more of a granular view into how our old process worked, where we would create all the deliverables, and usually in any one 2-week cycle, we call them cycles of development. There would be multiple deliverables. We would then test them, we would release them, we would review them in one or more sessions with the client, and these could get very lengthy because they're trying to digest multiple things at the same time. Finally, they would approve it. At that point, we would go in and we would bill the client, and in parallel with that, while we're waiting to get paid for those, we would be coming up and going through the effort of proposing what the new deliverables would be. And sometimes they were actually brand new ones, and sometimes more often than not, they were revisions of the first batch of deliverables. Finally, they would get approved, and we would move back to the beginning and repeat the cycle. And it just was taking too long to get stuff done, both from a client delivery standpoint, from a quality of life for our associates. Just was too much time being spent on meetings. It created a lot of stress, and then delayed cash flows, which significantly impact the business. So this was kind of our old process. Next slide.
Yeah, and I'd actually love for, I think this is a challenge, like those bottlenecks that you're describing is a challenge that so many agencies do experience. I hear about it a lot from professional services agencies and all sorts of sectors, not just Noloco consulting. So yeah, I'd love for if anyone on this call right now or in the audience can relate to this, do share or give a thumbs up. We'd like to hear from you. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of get an insight into how you decided to tackle these problems with the solution you designed.
So here was our approach to it. At a high level, we decided to separate the dependency between delivery and deliverables and billing. We made them so that they were not dependent on one another and actually happened in parallel, which we'll go into and show here in just a second how we did that. Second, we moved from doing, like, let's say in any one cycle of development or phase, let's say we had 10 deliverables. Instead of waiting until we had all 10 done and then testing all 10 and then delivering all 10 and then waiting for all 10 to be reviewed when the client finally had time to do so, usually through synchronous meetings, which required us to have even more back and forth and delayed meetings and the time that's required to schedule multiple people to even be on meetings before you could finally get them approved or revised, which just spread the cycle out. That added a tremendous amount of time and delay on the cycle. And then finally, billing. We moved to a model where if you imagine an assembly line, instead of waiting for everything to get multiple things to be produced and then packaged into one package, we started releasing each deliverable on its own as soon as it was done. And by using the technology in Noloco, we developed an environment where we could collaborate with the client in an asynchronous manner instead of a synchronous manner, so that as each deliverable came off, it immediately notified the client. They got a link to go into a portal. They went into a portal that showed them what the deliverable was. And it could be anything. It could have been a creative deliverable. For us, it was a user story, a piece of software that we had developed, a small chunk, but it was at a granular level. And then they could correspond with us in an asynchronous manner to say, this is great, but could you do this? And then we could actually do a revision without having to have a meeting on just that one deliverable and say, hey, we can make this change. Here's what we think the impact is going to be on the budget. Do you approve this? Do you not approve this? If any one of those deliverables got held up, either in the creation or in the review process, we just moved on to the next one. So we were never not working. We always had something to move on to. We would just skip to the next one. That was the intent, was to find a way to not have roadblocks or blockages.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting as well, and we'll see in a moment when you get into the demonstration, is when you have that sort of visibility or like transparency with the client. You know, you had the deliverable, the original version, and I can see it's resonating with people in the chat when that version or the deliverable needs to change based on client feedback. But when that change is being made, you can track that, the change is tracked, and the client is, you know, there's no messing around. They know exactly what change they caused. And it helps you build trust as well, you know, when everyone's working off the same hymn sheet and seeing changes being made when it comes to billing, which we'll get into later. So yeah, I'm starting to see how the solution is shaping up nicely to tackle those challenges you mentioned. So yeah, so moving on, I think you have another diagram, but just to recap, I suppose, everything that Matt said, massively reduce wait times, speeding up your billing. And I really like how you phrased it here, you know, giving your team that control over the process and not being at the disposal of how long the client is going to take to get back to you with their feedback and review. So yeah, really, really great solution design so far.
So I will, Sahil, I will answer your question here shortly. I'm going to go through an example of how we exactly do it. But the short answer is we do estimates by the hour. And let me also throw in a caveat here that there are other methods of solving this that have to do with your business model and how you bill. There are other ways of getting around this. And there may be ways of doing it when you have fixed fees that are slightly different. What I'm sharing here is the challenges that we faced and how we solve for them, hoping that there's maybe some broader applicability, at least in some small part for everybody else. So our new process, basically we set it up is we split the two processes into two separate processes that were not dependent on each other, billing and delivery. So billing, the way that we did it, and I will show you how we did this in just a second, is up front we would do an estimate, and we would say, hey, here are all the things, the deliverables you want. Here's our estimate by deliverable. It totals up to this amount of time or hours. It could have just been dollars. It didn't necessarily have to be hours, but we do hours. And then we would say, all right, so what's going to be what's the timeline for needing this? So for instance, if we had 100 hours and somebody said I needed this in 10 weeks, we knew that we would need to have a team working at a capacity of 10 hours a week for 10 weeks. Our cycles for development and for delivery are usually average 2 weeks. Just tends to be a manageable amount of time, realistic for doing stuff. And so what we would do is say, all right, what that basically means is we're doing 20 hours every cycle, 10 hours a week. In this case, 10 weeks is 5 cycles. And we already knew that in advance. Once the client approved the deliverables and the estimates, and they weren't fixed price, they were estimates, so they were subject to change, then we knew that we were going to need to have basically 5 cycles at 20 hours each, and we would create invoices for those in advance. Now, our particular model, the clients pay for that capacity at the beginning of each cycle, not at the end of each cycle. But once it's scheduled, it's done. like it's based pretty much an automated process. We set it up so with a merchant processor so that once the payment information or the payment method is set up in the merchant processor, we have an agreement with the client that we're just going to charge them that amount every 2 weeks for every cycle, every 2 weeks. So that's happening regardless of what happens with delivery. Now, that creates another problem, which is an easier problem for us to solve. The other problem, and the new problem that creates is if you're billing a client every 2 weeks for X amount of hours, you probably want to make sure that you're actually completing those hours. Otherwise, you have misaligned expectations, and it can lead to customer attrition. Like if they paid for 4 weeks worth of work and you've only gotten 2 weeks done, that's kind of bad juju. Like, eventually somebody's going to get a little bit upset about that, or it can cause some issues. So our part of what we do when we actually are forecasting work is not only revenue, but where are we on hours per cycle? Are we keeping up with budgeted versus actual at any time? That becomes a key metric for us to making sure we're keeping things in line with the billing schedule. So all that happens in our system literally is once we set the how many cycles and how much we're charging per cycle and what the dates are of those cycles, it populates all those invoices in advance, which by the way makes it very easy for us to forecast ahead of time when we're actually going to get paid. And as I mentioned, that these are paid automatically in advance at the beginning of every cycle. All the system is doing is saying, hey, I've got invoices. Is it the site start yet? Yeah, yes, it is. Bill the client, and we go through the merchant processor, and then we get paid. Delivery, as I mentioned, the way that changed is we moved from doing a whole bunch of stuff and then having the client digest it and wait for them to digest it to just doing one deliverable at a time, send it to them, and vastly simplify the process that they could review, revise, or approve those deliverables. And it's about a 40-60 split. So 60% of the time, the client is saying, hey, this looks great, but could you do this? And we're having to estimate and update the required number of cycles. So we don't change the amount of work we're doing per week, per se. If a revision comes into, a requested revision comes in, all we do is we say, okay, does this mean we need more cycles? Is this extended? Are we going to, that we had X amount of hours worth of work. You've asked for 10 more hours worth of work on this. Do we get rid of 10 hours of something else, which we can do, and say that that's no longer a priority? Or do we add 10 hours worth of cycle time to the overall process, which then also affects the timeline, obviously. So that's kind of how the two processes work, and they're completely separate from one another, obviously related.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop now and see if there's anything you wanted to comment on, Jill.
Yeah, no, I just think it makes a lot of sense, right? And I there was an interesting question that came in there during this overview, which is like, what's the secret to convince the client to pay in advance? And like for me, if I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the client, but if I can see what your team have committed to in a 2-week period, and I can see that, and I can see that these are all the deliverables I've asked for, and this is how long it's going to take, and it's in 2 weeks' time, I can check and make sure that you've done that, right? It is a period of time I feel that is, willing to take a gamble on almost if I was a client and trust you guys. And I suppose if it didn't work out, I'd put pressure on you, but I can kind of see the time frame, the visibility that they get into the cycle and the hours that are committed, and then seeing that, I suppose, process actually being met each cycle. I could see trust being built, but I'd be curious as well, like if there's anything you'd add to that, in terms of how you manage to get clients to trust you, to pay upfront. And
I'd say there's three things. First, we usually come into the conversation with a fair degree of credibility already. A lot of people have already watched Gareth's videos. We have a lot of domain expertise across a lot of industries. We can speak with authority on a lot of stuff. And then we've got great case studies to showcase to folks where they're like, okay, I can see that you can do this. The second thing is we're not asking for 50% up front, right? In which a lot of software development people still do that. They ask for a certain deposit up front. we're only saying, look, we're only asking for 2 weeks worth of time. And then the third way that we do to mitigate the perceived risks by the client is to say, hey, we give them the option of stopping the process at any 2 week point. So they're not committed to, if there's 5 cycles of development, they're paying for each cycle as it goes along. If they give us notice ahead of time and say, hey, we're good. You did the heavy lifting. We don't need you to do any more, which rarely happens. But that's in our contract. We allow them to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and stop this process. And it's obviously it's a contractual obligation for us. So I think that those three things help to mitigate the perceived risk and the willingness to get started and pay ahead, because they're making an incremental investment that they have to continue in order to see incremental value. Worst case scenario, they're going to be making a small investment for 2 weeks relative to the size of the project. And if they don't like it, then they can stop. Now, one other thing I will say is our methodology always starts before we begin development with doing what's called a blueprinting phase. That's also a very small investment for them to get started. And that blueprinting phase where we're working, and as you can see here on the screen, we're using our own methodology. This is what we do with clients: is we map the process out in usually much more detail, the old process and the new process, and show them examples of what we've done. And I think that gives them a feel for the caliber of our diligence and of our skill sets, so that by the time we say, okay, are you ready to get started, it doesn't look like that big of a commitment, and we've already built some trust and rapport with the client.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answered some of your questions.
I think so. I think it definitely does. So thankfully, we're now at the point where we can actually start showing them some of your Noloco solution.
Great.
So I'm going to hand over to you now, Matt, to share your screen.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's make sure I've got this. There we go. Okay, so this is our environment, obviously built all on Noloco. First thing I'm going to talk about is the billing. How do we set up that billing process as a separate and non-dependent workflow? So the way we do it is, as I mentioned, usually we work and we do a blueprint with a client, which is a very small paid engagement. It's not a big investment at all. And we map the whole thing out. The output from that process is a portal page that looks something like this, which we then share with the client. Everybody gets access to the portal as our mechanism for coordination and communication. Sorry, where did I go with this? Come on. Oh, over here. Hello. Okay. So they would get access when we completed our analysis to our blueprinting to something that lists all the deliverables. And this is just an overview of them. In our case, our deliverables are user stories. They could be anything. It could be completed research, completed creative design, a marketing analysis. It could be whatever services or deliverables you have defined in your organization. For us, it's user stories. And typically they go through several steps or phases: build, test, review, which become very relevant for speeding up the process. And I'll get into that in a second. But the first thing we do is we put everything in build, and we say, we're going to go build this. This is what we've identified. Here's what the estimated time is that's required to do it. It obviously has, a lot more data behind the screens in terms of what is it. And we have what we call different versions of deliverables, because we know that the client's going to muck with it and ask us to make some kind of a change. We just incorporated that into the process. But we're at this point, we basically say, all right, client, here's your blueprint. Here's all the information about it. Here's the schema we're recommending. Here's the technology stack we're recommending. We have both structured and unstructured information on the portal page. And then from here, once the client approves it, the next thing we say is, okay, this is basically going to be 117 hours, which is for us a larger project. And we would say, all right, the next question is, how soon do you want it done? So if they were to say, well, we want it in 10 weeks, that's about 12 hours a week. Or for us, our average cycle is 2 weeks. So it'd be 24 hours per cycle. What that means to me is 24 hours per cycle. We translate that, given our hourly rate, into this is what we're going to be charging you for this capacity of development every 2 weeks. And we go ahead, and once I book this project, which I haven't done yet, but once I book this project, it basically goes in and it creates all those invoices in advance and schedules them in advance. They're just waiting by Noloco and Airtable is the underlying database to just go and charge them automatically. We've already automatically set up when they made the first payment for discovery, we capture what the payment mechanism is. We've got all the information in there. It's just ready to go. All we need is contractual approval and sign off on approval by the client. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. Once it's actually, if I was to book a project, what it looks like is, nope, sorry, let me go back here. And we'll go to, the one I'll use today is our fictitious company, Supreme Flooring. So once I've actually booked the project, then you can see that down here, it's already created these invoices in advance. Now, at the time that I put this together, this client had already paid for a number of the cycles. What you would see is typically you would see paid would be like one of these invoices, and there would be a bunch of that would be in pending, which would be in a, before this in a different, they'd be grouped differently. And as they get paid, we're notified that they're paid. And it just kind of happens automatically. But it just sets all these, it basically creates invoice records in advance that are just waiting to be charged. The only thing that changes is the number of additional invoices. So if somebody comes back and we've got a 100-hour project, they ask for 20 hours worth of changes, we would add one more invoice for another 20 hours. And the client would agree to that in advance, and then it would just automatically charge it. So it basically makes billing a non-issue anymore, which I'll get to. But let's talk about production. So production, when we're actually in delivery, as I mentioned, we go through different, so the client can see this at any time, right? We've got a portal so they can track it, which leads to a lot less questions about where we are. And things move from build to test to review to complete. We have this category called pending because we use this as a way of saying, take stuff out of the budget. I've decided that this deliverable number 12, I want to use this money somewhere else, or I want to add 2 more hours onto this first one for a revision, and this one isn't important anymore. We just drag this one down to literally to pending, and it takes it out of the budget. So we're no longer accounting that against the budget. We're no longer working on that. Assuming that we are working on something, deliverables move from build to test to review. Now, how does that speed up the process? Well, number one, we don't necessarily have to work on them in any particular order. If any one of these things has a hold on it, either because it's in review or the client's not ready to get started on it or whatever, we just move to the next one. So we're always keeping our folks working, and they're just working on things and jumping around to find where can I get work done. The next thing we do in order to shorten that cycle is as soon as something gets done and gets moved into review, that looks like is, I'm going to take you to the client gets an email saying this one's ready for you to review and approve or revise. They click on it, it goes into a portal, and it takes them to a page that looks like this, where it says, here's the deliverable. This is what we agreed to deliver for you for this deliverable. In our case, we're including a video to say, here's the actual process. And then we have a way for the person to correspond with the project manager back and forth, provide feedback, give any example attachments, et cetera, possibly have correspondence with the project manager about, oh, I've requested this revision. It means it's going to be this many more hours. Do you agree to this or not? And if this process gets delayed, I just move to the next work on that deliverable. So this allows us through the unique capabilities that Noloco has as a platform for the client to be reviewing each deliverable asynchronously on their own time, which works great if we're in different time zones, and get stuff done. So I remember we actually used our own system. We used this process to build this system, which is very meta, I know. But we use this process to build this system. And I remember when we were building it, we were saying, hey, how well does this work with this asynchronous? And I was literally taking the train from Stockholm to Oslo, and was able to get on and on my phone even, and they were able to say, here's the video, could see it just fine, provide my feedback. No, I want this change, I want this change. So, we eat our own dog food, right? We tested our own process and methodology to make sure that it worked, and it worked great. And it seems to work. It doesn't solve all their problems, but it seems to work great with clients and to really close those loops. Now, nothing will solve a bad client. If you've got a client who's got unrealistic expectations and just wants to talk forever, you're still going to end up just spending just as much time on each individual deliverable as you did when you delivered all the deliverables. But by and large, if you've got reasonable clients, then this process goes well. And it's about a 60-40 split. 40% of the time, they're just signing off and saying, oh, this is approved. 60% of the time, they're saying, hey, what if we did this? Or could we do this? And we say, usually what we'll say is one of two things. Are you okay with it being this many more hours? Or how is this actually contributing to your workflow being more productive? That gets rid of that 60%. That removes about half of those things, those revisions right there. When they're like, yeah, that's a bell and whistle. That's not really actually making our workflow any more productive.
Yeah.
So that's kind of in a nutshell how we do billing and how we're able to close the loop faster on a deliverable by deliverable basis with clients from a delivery standpoint.
Brilliant. Yeah, a few things that I loved that you pointed out there is just like the ability to be able to just have this on your phone, right? We're always on the move these days, but that goes to the client as well, right? Not just you on the delivery side. They can log in at any point in time, any time in the evening, and check out these Loom videos. But this is a really nice design. I like the use of tabs as well. And I think just for new people on the webinar, I know there's definitely a handful that are very new to Noloco and are on the free plan or trialing Noloco. So what you're seeing here is what the client sees, I suppose. And Matt's team would see a lot more information as well. And that's all controlled through visibility and roles and permissions. But yeah, it's really nice to see that finished project and how it actually works in line with everything that you've shared. So
one of the things I didn't show was all of the reporting we can now do, which when we get to Q&A, if people are interested in seeing that, we're able to do that significantly better now. So by the way, I stopped sharing the slides. That may have screwed up what you were sharing.
No. So you were sharing your demo screen and you stopped sharing. So what we'll do is for the Q&A, Matt has kindly offered that he can reshare any parts of the app that may answer some of your questions. So if people have questions that they'd like to see more of, like I can see here, people would like to see reporting. So we might dive back into that when we get to the Q&A. But let's just move on, quickly recap the solution that you showed us. But most importantly, I suppose, the impact of this new process. What results did it bring to your team?
Right. So it's not a silver bullet, didn't solve every problem for it, but it did make a measurable difference. For basically the challenge we were having before with we're waiting to get stuff done before we get paid completely went away. It's not even an issue anymore. Like we just know when we're going to get paid and we get paid. And as long as we're not running into an issue of either our budget versus actual is out of variance significantly, that's causing concerns for the client, or if the client's just saying, hey, we feel like we're not going to continue, which is maybe 5% of the time, then it doesn't impact our billing in any measurable way. So that's been a significant relief for us right there, where we just, we know we need to make our number, and as long as we're filling up our pipeline and we've got once the billing is established and the project is going, it's not really an issue. Now, the only time it is an issue is when we get these big, really wonderful leads from Airtable for huge enterprise clients that decide they want to pay us sometime in 2030. That's an issue, right? So still deal with people that we've got we have to go through sort of their delayed billing process, which does not end up being a major part of our business because we don't allow it to be a major part of our business anymore. That sometimes is an issue. But other than that, pretty much everybody is set up on automatic billing with the terms and conditions that we agree to up front, and it works just great for all parties. Other thing that it had was a significant impact on our utilization. People are no longer waiting to do work. There's always work available pretty much to do. Sometimes there's delays between projects, but once we're in a project, we don't really have issues with billing. And there's pretty much always things for people to work on without us waiting. They just hopscotch, they'll hop to the next deliverable if one gets blocked and keep working on it. And as a result, on any one project, our average billing per week went up about 50%. We have fewer client meetings than we needed to have before to go back and forth, because a lot of the approvals are happening asynchronously. They have everything they need to make their decision, unless they have a committee, then that's sometimes a challenge. And then, as I mentioned, because we're capturing these invoices in advance, our forecasting becomes very easy. And we've built a system which, as we're doing today, we're able to showcase to folks to show best practices, at least from an agency perspective or a project management perspective.
That's really cool. I love that. Yeah, you get to demo this in a sales cycle or a sales pitch to bring on a new client. And that's such a nice touch, and I'm glad it works for you guys as a method. But yeah, we'll get into the Q&A, but before we do that, just some, I suppose, next steps and action points for anyone on this call. We do have a really big mix from what I saw in the registrants, right from brand new Noloco users to our longest standing customers, and even some of our certified experts and agencies. So a few different kind of call to actions depending on who you are. But yeah, I suppose from a roundup from my side, I just want to thank you, Matt, before we even get to the Q&A. I think it's always nice when you get a peek behind the curtain. And I think it's very generous of you to share that with everyone. And I know that there's people who want to get to dive back in and see more. So we'll get to that. But really, I just hope that everyone walks away with some, I suppose, inspiration, some practical ideas of things that you can start building in your solution tomorrow. So I suppose a few things, as I say, for next steps. So if you're brand new and you've not even signed up to Noloco, I would definitely recommend you do. We have a free plan, which you can sign up to at portals.noloco.io/register. Our free plan launched last month. So yeah, basically you'll get a great taste of Noloco with the free plan. You can play around with all the different features and functions. We've got loads of videos on our YouTube channel, tutorials, as well as templates that you can, start when you're building with your app, so you're not starting with absolute on ground zero. So I definitely recommend you do, and let us know how you get on with Noloco. And if you have any questions, our support team are very active and on hand to answer any of those questions during your early building days. For those of you who are already building and testing out Noloco for a number of days or weeks now, I really hope you've picked up some tips and tricks, and you will continue to do so when we get to the Q&A and Matt shows a little bit more of the solution. And yeah, hopefully you can bring that into your own setup and into your own workspace, depending on what's applicable. And then lastly, if you're at all interested in working directly with Gap Consulting for consulting or expert help on how to build the best Noloco solution for your business, I think we can all see that Matt's team are extremely proficient at workflow design and picking apart your process, and of course scrutinizing the old way and making it a lot better and more optimal, and make your whole agency or your business operations a lot more smoother. So if anyone wants to work with the Gap team and Matt, he has dropped his link to have a free consultation in the chat, but I'll be following up as well in an email with all the links you need, as well as a link to this recorded session. And
I realize that some of the questions, certainly some of the ones I see coming in, are maybe as much oriented around business model as they are around the technology, and that's fine. I'm happy to spend the time, book time with you, and go into more detail to answer these questions at your convenience. I'm not sure I have time to answer all the questions, but I'll try and go down the list if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
let's dive in.
Okay, so yes, we have clients that have been 3-year clients. What happens is that, fortunately, as you saw, we moved from build to test to review to complete.
One thing, Matt, Which question are you answering? Will you read out the question before answering?
Oh,
So people, yeah.
would this process work for a long-term client, 3+ years working with, or is there more short-term projects and deliverables?
Perfect. Yeah.
Um, we can do either. And because of the fact that we move things either down to pending or to complete, what ends up happening is you'll have 50, 60, 70 deliverables that are incomplete, but you still have the recorded history of it, and what was done and who worked on it and whatever, which has value in other ways. And you're only ever really looking at what do we have in build for the current cycle. So it seems to scale well. You have a place to put all the completed stuff without, junking up your view of things, without it getting, being too much.
Right.
Okay. And I apologize if I've missed some other questions that came in before that. I'm just gonna try
No,
and
I
get
think
out.
you're starting at a good point. So I can hit you with the next one. I think you definitely have an answer for this. So next one was from Sahil. What if you go over the estimated hours within the cycle, or if you need to add more cycles, where, or how are those changed? And I actually think somebody specifically further down has asked kind of a similar question, how do you manage deliverable versioning? So I don't know if that's best served
Yeah.
through a demo, or do you want to add a few comments before showing anything?
I'll add a few comments. So, from a business policy or process standpoint, uh, we we sometimes choose to go over the hours in order to expedite something, but it's usually at our choice. We are the job of the project manager. Their job is to ensure that we're using all the hours and no more. So they have to rein in both the developer and our team. Our team consists of usually a project manager and a developer. So we have somebody responsible for keeping things within the budget and somebody that's just heads down and it's creating the deliverables. And their job is to say, and as you complete a deliverable or a version of a deliverable, which is a structural thing that we have in our schema that allows us to do that, people are logging time against it. So we can actually go back and say, well, how much time was spent on version 1, version 2, version 3? More importantly, we're able to go to the client and say, hey, you know why your project stalled? Because we have 17 versions of, deliverable number 1. Do you kind of want to get off this and move on, or do you want to keep, going on this? And it's a check and balance against the customer in a lot of cases. And sometimes the answer is no, this is actually the highest priority thing. Most cases, though, it's like, okay, we'll just get out of our own way now and let you do your job. So usually we will not spend any more hours. We will stop work. We won't, even if we haven't completed all the deliverables, because part of our agreement is that this is custom. What we're building is something that's custom. Therefore, there's no way of giving you a fixed price for it. Therefore, if you start requesting additional changes, it changes the time, which changes how much we can actually get done at any one cycle. So we're typically not, to answer the question, we're typically not going over the hours in the cycle unless we make a choice to, because we know the client's good for it and we feel like there's a heavy dependency on getting this done before we can move into the next deliverable. There's dependencies between them, then sometimes we'll make the investment.
Brilliant. Okay, that's
Oh, in
great.
terms of adding cycles, it's very simple. Like on each deliverable, we're negotiating with the client and saying, hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to move something into pending? We've added 10 more hours to the project in requested changes. Do you want to just go ahead and add 10 hours? In which case we'll make the adjustment to the number of cycles, which they'll see as soon as we do it. They'll see it on the portal page. Like they'll see where it is, what the total budget is. And they have proven in advance. Or do you want to move 10 hours worth of something else into pending? And they tell us and we do it, and it can go either way.
Brilliant. Yeah, great. And are you able to give the audience an insight into, I suppose, how you manage deliverable versioning? So you had that deliverable feedback page that the client can, provide their feedback on. But let's say now the overwhelm, they want loads of changes. So how do you then go about handling that in the system?
No problem. So typically we won't do new versions within any one cycle unless it's really a high priority. Typically we're finishing all of the other things that we've got, the first versions of everything that we've got that are already been allocated to a particular cycle. But then we'll estimate and say, okay, well, now we're going into cycle number 2 and we're going to incorporate these. To create a new version is literally for every deliverable, there's actually sort of a sub record called versions that rolls up to the deliverable, which I could if you wanted to get me on a call, I'd be happy to show you specifically how it works. But the project manager says, okay, I've got feedback. I'm marking this version as complete, and I'm adding a new version to this deliverable. It copies over all of the existing text and everything else and description of what that deliverable is to the new version. And then it allows them to put in, okay, here's the changes we're making. And now I'm re-estimating the time that's necessary for this new version. And then that just rolls up to the deliverable, which then rolls up to the project and says, here's the overall change in budget. So it's something that we kind of perfected over time. We got more complicated before we found ways to make it simpler. But it's just a matter of like clicking buttons to do it. It's a fairly straightforward process.
Brilliant. Great.
I saw something here about customer contracts. So when we get done, and this is very interesting functionality that I'd like to show you, but we probably don't have time to do today. When we get done with our blueprint, we send it to the client in the portal for them to sign off on. Once they sign off on it, it literally then creates a contract that comes up in a dialog box with all the terms and conditions. And at that point, they are signing the contract and putting their electronic signature in it with all the terms and conditions, and then indicating what the payment methods will be for it all in one step. And I'd be happy to show that in more detail at some point.
Great. Okay. I think the overwhelming kind of running commentary from here on in, Matt, is people are very curious to see reporting. I don't know if that's something we can dive back into the system for.
Yes, please.
Great. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
All right. So as I mentioned, what we need to be able to report may be different than what other people need to be able to report. Where is my, oh, that's not it. Hold on, let me just make sure I've got it here. Ah, there we go. So as I mentioned, because we're gathering a lot of this information up front, it allows us, and we know, number one, when the invoices are coming in. But the other thing that we know is if we go into any one project, we know who's doing the work. Like on each one of these deliverables, I know how much time, usually what date is it due, how much time is it going to take, and then I can go in and see, well, who's the person that's actually assigned to this? The project manager is this, the developer is this, the project manager has this many hours, the developer has this many planned hours. By having this in advance, what it allows me to do is to say, how much is any one person working on in any one week? Because I've got dates, hours, deliverables, and people and resources assigned to it. I just roll it all up to say, at a macro level, how many hours is Zoe allocated across all of her projects? So I can forecast billing, but I can also forecast utilization. So it's super easy for me to like not overload people. So whether that actually shows up, this is the input side. The output side is when I can go down, as I mentioned before, we're basically not trying to track delivery to ensure we get paid. We track payments completely separate. All we're doing is we're managing hours to meet revenue. That's basically how we run the business. And so we have forecast revenue, and obviously I've just put some dummy data in here to try and make the point. But we can easily say we've got these projects that are going on, and these are when we have the cycles with the forecasted, stuff that's coming in, and we can kind of see that in advance. We can do statistics on what's the status of the invoices. Have they been sent? Have they been paid? Where are they? I can go into each individual invoice and say, what's the status of this, or this is the history of payment, and show me the actual, excuse me, show me what the actual invoice was. I think this is running a little slow today, but typically it would actually bring up the invoice in the right-hand panel here for us to look at. Can I do that? Let me see if I can do that. No, it's not doing it right now, but we've got all the detailed information. I can see the PDF and all that kind of good stuff about this. And that provides great from a revenue forecasting, which is equally, if not more important, is to say, show me project budget versus actual in terms of hours. Like, where are we? Like, we've got for whatever cycle we're in for every project, how many budgeted hours and how much have we actually completed, and how many days do we have left in the cycle? So for instance, this one's a problem, right? With this, the way that I set up this fictitious data is this one technically is showing, hey, we had for this cycle of development that we're in, we had 47.8 hours. We completed 11. We've still got, a lot of hours to go and we're 2 days over. Like this is a red flag. This is where we're saying our production is lagging with our revenue. This could be a problem. And that's why we use this as our exception reporting every week when we meet with the project managers to say, where are we on this? How do we solve for this? This is a potential problem. The good news is we've been paid. Bad news is that we want to make sure that we continue to get paid. So we've got to manage these things so that they are so we're keeping within our budget versus actual. And then I can do things, as I mentioned before, to say what's my utilization or forecast utilization. And I don't have enough dummy data here to show it really accurately, but I can say per week, per person, where our project managers at, where our developers at, look at some other kind of reporting around this. But it allows me to do this, and very easily I can determine like things down to profitability by project, not a problem, very easy to do. See what time entries are per week. It allows us to, on the portal, we actually post, but the client can see what are all my invoices, which invoices still need to be paid, which ones have already been paid. Is there any action we need the client to take? Like that's all on the client's portal as well. It just facilitates a faster turnaround time. So I'm not sure if I've exceeded my time here, but
No, we're
that's an
still
answer.
good. We have about 8 minutes left before we hit the hour. But I love your use of pivot tables. So this was a feature launched like earlier this year. But it's so nice to see it being used in the wild for such like a useful use case. But it's so clear, like it's a very complex report, but it's so clear, you clearly see by resource as well as by the projects that resource is working on, budgeted, actual, and hours to plan. Yeah, it's great. And then the record coloring as well, which is a newer addition to the product set, but being able to conditionally highlight the bad records, right? That we need to action imminently.
The other things we can do is we for those clients that we have receivables with, we can track, when are these due, what's the status, payables, things that need to go out and people need to be paid or things need to be paid. We can track that. And then the other big thing that we do is this is integrated with QuickBooks. We've also done it with Xero and other accounting packages where the transactions occur in Noloco and Airtable, and then we push the journal entries to QuickBooks. So for instance, if we need to do payables, we identify them in here, select the vendor, do all that stuff. The entry gets made here, and then it pushes it as a journal entry with the right chart of accounts number into QuickBooks. So it's just kind of seamless. So we can do the financial reporting either out of here or out of QuickBooks. Either one's fine. In many cases, the actual transactions but the payments are actually, when we do payables, are paid out of QuickBooks. So
Great.
it just pushes it.
I think that answers a question we received quite early in the session, actually, from Shane Conrad. So yeah, he was curious to know what payment processing system you were using. So I think that answers that question, which is great.
For incoming payments, in other words, receivable, we have looked at several different options and tested different options. The simplest and easiest one to do is Stripe. However, it's the most expensive with the transaction fees. We actually moved to Pay Simple, which we had to tweak a little bit as a mechanism as a different merchant processor who had far less transaction fees in order to expedite payment.
Great, brilliant. We have a little bit of time left, about 5 minutes, so we'll see what we get through and then we'll wrap up. But some question here around documentation. So I'm gonna assume he means documenting changes being made. So yeah, basically the question is, do you also manage documentation in Noloco? Not talking about the video that describes the workflow, but just documentation that goes along with the project.
Well, I can only speak to software. So from a software standpoint, because we have already created a blueprint, which is documented what all of the use cases are, and it goes into fairly good detail. So the example I provided you before was, and I'm not sure how well this applies to other type of agencies, but for software development in particular, when we we get pretty granular in terms of defining what actually has to happen at each step. So if we say that this is a user story, then we have what's called the event objective. It's kind of like acceptance criteria, where we say as a salesperson, somebody's going to specifically do this and the system needs to do this. These are things we can evaluate to say, are we done?
Yeah.
Like when we go to the client, we can basically say, look, does it do this or does it not? Or the project manager can hold the developer responsible. I want it to do exactly this. I want it to be able to create this kind of input, do this processing, and produce this kind of output. Does it do that? Even from a generic standpoint, there may be some UI elements you still need to move around, but the guts of it is data in, processing, and data out. That defines success. Does it do those things? And if it doesn't, and we've promised this, then it's under warranty. It's on us. If it does do this, but it doesn't do it in exactly the way the client wants, well, then they're going to pay for it. So that's the way that we sort of set the bar on whether a deliverable is complete or not. And this is very specific to software, but I'm sure that you could do the same thing, and we probably face the same issues on how do you define done? What's within scope, without scope? Are you paying for it? You're not paying for it. Those are always issues with service-based businesses.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to see it in Noloco. So each deliverable is very detailed and it's all stored in there and will remain there forevermore. So yeah, great. I think we have time for one more question and then we'll wrap up. It's from Sebastian. So if you've reached the end of deliverables, do you have cycles where you don't bill and then as new small requests come through, you start billing again? I.e., would the customer have to pay for a full cycle for a small request?
Great question. So we have, as you may have noticed here, we have different phases that projects go through: scoping, discovery, blueprint, development, and then we have support. So support is its own unique animal, and we could have a couple options from a business model standpoint. We have clients who, usually smaller businesses, are like, look, I just want to call you when I want to call you and get somebody to help me and just pay it on an hourly basis. Okay, we can do that. But I'm not going to guarantee that you're going to get the people that worked on the project. Like we have other people that are sitting there that are Airtable experts, and they will get in there and they will help you on an hourly basis. But I'm not reserving the capacity of my team on the chance that you might call them. Like I'm not going to do that. That doesn't make economic sense. Like these people need to be booked on other stuff. Unless the client says, no, this is mission critical. I am going to actually go into and pay for support cycles in advance. And you don't have to buy like multiple cycles in advance, but you need to pay for at least one support cycle in advance, which again, we can determine. Those could be a month long for a cycle as opposed to being 2 weeks long. And we're basically saying, look, we're setting aside this team for X number of hours to be available. But the caveat is it's use it or lose it for those hours. Those people have been sitting there not working on something else for 10 hours or 20 hours or however much you need. I'm not rolling those hours forward. I'm not going to incur that debt where I could have had them booked on something else. Those are my assets. They need to be fully booked at all times. So that's a decision we've made on how to do it. And it seems to work okay for a lot of our clients. If it's a mission critical thing, they get the actual, and by the way, if we go into a support sprint, they get the actual team members that worked on the project. So their resolution time is much faster.
Brilliant. Great insight or in-depth answer. So thank you for that, Matt. And yeah, that is the time. We are now 5 o'clock, well, 5 o'clock my time, end of the session. But I just want to thank everyone for your engagement throughout. There was lots of really great questions, and I'm sure there's many more fizzing up. So I'll be following up, as I say, with an email with some of those links, including one to connect with Matt after today's session. So hopefully we can get some of those outstanding questions answered. And yeah, I suppose just thank you to Matt for your time and being so willing to share some really great insights to take away, I think.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for your time and your participation. I am more than happy to get on a phone call. You don't have to buy anything. If you just want to chat, I mean, I'm cool with that. I'm good with that. So feel free to call me.
Thank you so much. We'll leave it there. See you, everyone. Have a great evening.